Welcome to MSL Stories. I really appreciate your support. Let's start the story. Trust is like glass. Once shattered, you see the cracks even after it's put together. I used to think my life was perfect. I'm a sailor, and my job demands long stretches away from home. But the trade-off was worth it. I had a family I cherished, a wife who claimed to love me deeply, and children that made me feel like the luckiest man alive. 6 months at sea, 6 months at home. It was a rhythm we had mastered. My career spanned decades, and after years of hard work, I had climbed to a position where money wasn't a concern. Our home was beautiful, our lifestyle comfortable, and we were able to afford nearly anything we wanted. My wife, Maria, loved the life we built, or so I thought. She often talked about how lucky we were to be living such a privileged existence. We had 2 children together, a boy and a girl, aged 8 and 5, and I also had a son from my previous marriage. Maria was a wonderful mother, or at least she played the role convincingly. We had what people call the perfect family. The first hint that things were off came when Maria told me she was pregnant again. I couldn't believe it at first. We hadn't planned on more children. In fact, I thought we couldn't have more, given our age. She was nearing 40 and I wasn't getting any younger either. But the idea of a new child filled me with joy. Despite the surprise, I was ready to embrace fatherhood once more, and we began preparing for the arrival of the baby. That was until the first medical screening. The due date didn't make sense. I distinctly remembered the timeline. I had been at sea when this supposed miracle happened. At first, I dismissed it, thinking that maybe I had calculated wrong, but the nagging feeling stayed. 5 weeks. That was the discrepancy. I kept telling myself that these things happen, that doctors get dates wrong all the time. But 5 weeks was too big of a gap to ignore. When I confronted Maria, she brushed it off, blaming the doctors, saying the dates were just estimates. Mistakes happen, she said. Why are you worrying? You're just stressed from work. I wanted to believe her, but the seed of doubt had been planted. As much as I wanted to trust her, my gut screamed that something wasn't right. 6 weeks off, to be exact, and the more I thought about it, the more the cracks in our life started to show. Little did I know this pregnancy wasn't just a mistake in timing. It was the beginning of the end of everything I thought I knew about the woman I called my wife. This wasn't my child, it couldn't be, but I needed proof, and that's when everything began to unravel. I tried to push the doubt aside, to forget about the timing, but once suspicion creeps in, it festers. Every interaction with Maria started to feel off. She wasn't the woman I thought I knew anymore. The way she looked at me changed. There was a distance in her eyes, a careful detachment that hadn't been there before. I wasn't sure if it was guilt or something else, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than a simple miscalculation of dates. I began paying more attention to the small things, details I would have never noticed before. Maria was secretive about her phone, keeping it close and locking it whenever I was around. She started going out more often, taking long drives, claiming she needed time to clear her head or to run errands. And the excuses, her reasons for being late, for avoiding simple conversations, started to pile up. They were flimsy at best. If I was stressed, if I was paranoid, then why did everything suddenly seem to scream at me that something was wrong? A memory flashed in my mind. 6 months ago, before my last departure, she had insisted that we hire a new gardener. Our old one had retired, and she wanted someone local, someone who could keep up with the yard while I was gone. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. It seemed reasonable. But now, every interaction, every decision she had made in the past few months felt like a calculated move to cover up something I hadn't been privy to. The nagging feeling persisted. I couldn't confront her without evidence, but I needed to know. I had been gone for months. Anything could have happened in my absence. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I hired a private investigator. If I was going to find out the truth, I needed someone who could be my eyes when I wasn't there. The investigator, an older man named Lewis, had seen it all before. When I first contacted him, I felt a strange shame for even thinking this might be the reality. "Are you sure about this?" he had asked me during our initial meeting. I wasn't. I wanted to believe that I was overreacting, that my suspicions were nothing more than a paranoid fantasy, but I couldn't. Not until I had answers. Lewis was discreet. He followed Maria for a week, and during that time I kept up the facade at home. I pretended everything was normal, even though every time I looked at her, I felt like my heart was being torn apart by the weight of unspoken questions. It was a constant tension between us, like we were both waiting for something to break. but she had no idea I was the one who was ready to shatter everything. A week later, Lewis called me. I had been waiting anxiously for his report, though I wasn't sure I was ready to hear the truth. But what he told me confirmed everything I had feared. And worse. He had followed Maria to a small house on the other side of town. She was meeting a man there twice a week, every Tuesday and Friday. The man, Ben, was the new gardener. The same man who had been working at our house while I was away. The same man I had paid to mow my lawn, trim the hedges, and keep everything looking neat and tidy in my absence. I was disgusted. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the fact that she had carried on with this man, parading him around our property in plain sight, while I had been thousands of miles away, trusting her. I thanked Lewis for his work, but inside I was seething. I wanted to explode, to confront her right then and there, but something stopped me. There was no use in letting my anger control me now. Not yet. I needed to be smart. Maria didn't know that I knew, and that was the only advantage I had left. The DNA test was my next step. I had to know for certain if the child she was carrying was mine or Ben's. The thought of raising another man's child, of being deceived like that, made me sick to my core. I had never felt so betrayed in my entire life. If the baby wasn't mine, there would be no going back. There would be no reconciliation, no saving our marriage, and deep down, I knew I didn't want to save it anymore. The results came back a few days later. The baby wasn't mine. Everything inside me shattered at that moment. The last sliver of hope I had been clinging to evaporated. Maria had not only betrayed me, but she had also brought a child into this world that wasn't mine, lying to me, trying to make me believe it was my own. I sat there holding the DNA results in my hand, feeling a cold rage settle over me. There would be no forgiveness, no excuses. It was time for action. I knew what I had to do. The moment I held those DNA results in my hand, something inside me shifted. I had spent weeks in emotional turmoil, questioning my sanity, feeling the weight of Maria's lies press down on me like a heavy storm. But now, with proof in my hand, the storm passed, and what replaced it was clarity, a cold, calculating clarity. I knew what needed to be done. First, I had to be smart. Revenge couldn't be a reckless act born from rage. It had to be precise, methodical. This wasn't about yelling or smashing things. That would only give her the satisfaction of knowing she had broken me. No, my revenge would be far quieter and far more destructive. The first step was securing my financial position. I reviewed the prenuptial agreement we had signed before marriage. At the time, it had seemed like a mere formality, but I had been wise enough to include an infidelity clause. If she ever cheated, she would walk away with next to nothing. The house, the savings, everything substantial was protected. I smiled bitterly at the irony. Maria, who had always acted like we were partners in every sense, would soon find out that her betrayal had left her with nothing but the consequences of her actions. I began shifting assets discreetly. Bank accounts were restructured, investments quietly moved. I ensured that the bulk of our financial resources were either in my name or locked down in trusts for our children. I would never let them suffer for her mistakes. My children were my priority, and they would have everything they needed, while she, on the other hand, would be left with only the mess she had made. Maria, oblivious to the storm about to hit, continued her daily routine, still blissfully unaware that her little game had come to an end. She smiled at me over dinner, acted as though nothing had changed, but I was done playing along. I knew now that every smile, every laugh, every affectionate gesture had been a lie. Next came the emotional groundwork. Maria needed to feel the void that was about to swallow her life, and I had to do it in such a way that she wouldn't see it coming. I stopped confronting her. No more accusations, no more questions about the pregnancy or the dates. I became distant, but in a way that felt almost invisible. I was still there, going through the motions, but emotionally, I was already gone. She noticed, of course. I could see it in the way her eyes searched mine during dinner, or the way she tried to strike up conversations, only to be met with polite indifference. I started taking longer trips away from the house, weekends where I wouldn't tell her where I was going. I'd leave without a word, come back late, and when she asked, I'd give vague responses. Just needed some time to think, I'd say, knowing full well it mirrored the excuses she had given me. The power shift was subtle, but she started to feel the unease. The doubt that had plagued me was now infecting her. And Ben, oh Ben, I had plans for him too. A man like him, someone who thought he could sneak into another man's life and take what wasn't his, deserved a special kind of treatment. I needed to make sure he paid for what he had done, and I wanted to hit him where it hurt the most. I made a few calls. It wasn't hard to find out where he worked. The garbage collection company wasn't exactly a fortress of secrets. He was an hourly worker, just scraping by, doing side jobs like lawn mowing to supplement his income. I started gathering information on him through Lewis, my private investigator. What I discovered wasn't surprising. Ben had a pattern. He'd seduced other women before, charming them while their husbands or boyfriends were away, all while playing the part of the helpful handyman, a predator hiding in plain sight. I couldn't destroy him with physical force. That would be too easy, and it would give him a way out. No, I needed to ruin him completely. I anonymously sent the evidence of his affair with Maria to his boss, as well as to some of the local businesses he freelanced for. I framed it as a pattern of unethical behavior, questioning his trustworthiness and reliability. With his reputation ruined and his income sources drying up, Ben would soon be scrambling to make ends meet. Then there was the final piece, Maria. I bided my time until the perfect moment. On a seemingly ordinary Thursday morning, I served her the divorce papers. I had rehearsed that moment in my head 1,000 times. But when it came, I didn't feel anger, just cold satisfaction. She opened the envelope at the breakfast table, and for a second, I saw the confusion in her eyes. Her hands trembled as she read the papers, her face paling as she realized what was happening. "Adam, what is this?" she stammered, her voice shaking. I looked at her, calm and steady. "It's exactly what it looks like. You cheated. You lied. This is the result." Her face twisted, scrambling for explanations, excuses, anything to stop the tide that was crashing over her. Wait, I can explain. It wasn't like that. I made a mistake." I interrupted her, my voice cold. "I already know everything, Maria. I know about Ben. I know the child isn't mine. Don't waste your breath." Her shock turned to desperation. She begged, pleaded, trying to find a way to salvage something, but it was too late. The prenuptial agreement was ironclad. She wasn't walking away with anything but the clothes on her back. I watched as the reality of her situation sank in. She wouldn't have the comfortable life she had enjoyed for years, the life I had provided. It was all slipping through her fingers, and there was nothing she could do. I stood up, leaving her there at the table, tears streaming down her face. "You made your choices, Maria. Now you have to live with them." As I walked out of the room, I didn't look back. I had done what needed to be done. I walked out of that breakfast room knowing that my part in this marriage was officially over. Maria was left sobbing at the table, her once perfect life crumbling before her eyes. But I wasn't done yet. I still had one more thing to do. My revenge wasn't just about the divorce. It was about making sure that every part of her betrayal had consequences. The next few days passed in a blur. I focused on my children, giving them the attention and love they needed. They were the only reason I felt anything close to remorse for what I was doing. I knew that the divorce would disrupt their lives, but I also knew that staying with Maria would be worse for them in the long run. A household built on lies was no place for them to grow up. During this time, I also made sure that everything was in place legally. The prenup was rock solid, but I wanted to ensure that my children were protected too. I filed for full custody. Maria didn't even see it coming. She was too focused on trying to salvage her own life. I knew the courts would side with me, given her infidelity and the solid evidence I had gathered. As for Ben, his downfall was just beginning. Once I had sent the evidence of his affair with Maria to his boss, word spread quickly. Ben was fired within a week. It didn't stop there. His reputation in our community was ruined. The small town we lived in thrived on gossip, and once people found out he was sleeping with a married woman while on the job, doors started closing on him. He lost his other contracts too. Nobody wanted a man like him near their homes, but that wasn't enough for me. I wanted him to feel the same sense of loss and powerlessness that I had felt. So I went one step further. I contacted his wife. I had Lewis gather everything, pictures, reports, times, and dates of his meetings with Maria. When I contacted his wife, I was calm, almost clinical. I simply presented the facts. She didn't cry or scream when I told her. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke volumes. "Thank you for letting me know," she said softly before hanging up the phone. I had a feeling that Ben's home life was about to fall apart just as fast as his professional one. And then, finally, came the day of the custody hearing. Maria showed up, looking frail and anxious. She had hoped that I would soften by now, that maybe I would relent and offer her a lifeline, but I didn't. I presented my case clearly and confidently. The evidence of her affair, the DNA test results, and her inability to provide a stable environment for our children were all laid bare in front of the judge. Maria tried to defend herself, but it was no use. The judge awarded me full custody of our 2 children. Maria was granted visitation rights, but nothing more. She looked shattered as the ruling was read. I could tell she had never expected to lose this much. When the gavel came down, signaling the end of the hearing, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. It was over. Maria was no longer a part of my life in any meaningful way. She had lost her home, her financial stability, and most painfully, her full-time role as a mother. Everything she had taken for granted was gone. As for me, I had my children and my freedom. That was all I needed. But revenge, as satisfying as it was, left a strange emptiness. I had destroyed everything that had once hurt me, but now I had to rebuild something new. My focus shifted entirely to my children, ensuring they had a stable, loving environment to grow up in. I threw myself into my work, my time with them, and began to rediscover the things that made me happy before the betrayal. Maria was a ghost now, someone who had once been important, but was now just a shadow in the past. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she had moved in with her sister, struggling to piece together the remnants of her life. Ben was still out there too, jobless and ostracized, trying to pick up the fragments of what was left of his reputation. I didn't need to see their suffering to feel satisfied. I had already won. In the end, betrayal changes you. It hardens you, forces you to see the world through different eyes. But it also frees you from the lies, the manipulation, the weight of someone else's mistakes. I walked away from that life stronger, wiser, and determined never to let anyone hurt me or my children again. Maria and Ben may have thought they could walk all over me, that I would be just another man left to pick up the pieces. But they were wrong, because I didn't just pick up the pieces, I built something new, and I left them with nothing but the wreckage of their own making. Thank you, friends.